Hello, today we're going to be assembling the 700R4 valve body. This is a 1992 unit, and we're going to be installing a Transgo Jr shift kit. I like the Transgo Jr kit because it's not too expensive and it comes with an updated TV valve. And this TV valve has a couple features that the factory one doesn't, that ultimately reduces the probability of the valve sticking in the bore, which is one of the more common complaints of a 700R4. So if you look at the valve and you compare it to the factory valve, the factory valve has just one solid land here in the rear, whereas the Transgo valve has two lands and a little groove to allow particulate matter and grit and other whatnot to escape, and otherwise allow the valve to stroke freely in the bore. It also has a hollow snout where a spring goes, and then you have another spring, so you have two different springs here that will prevent the valve from sticking when it's being kind of stroked in the open position. So those are two different ways the valves can stick, and this valve kind of addresses both ways. If you have a sticking TV valve, symptoms would include inconsistent line pressure and line rise, high line pressure, low line pressure, missing gears, particularly the 3/4 upshift. Common complaint is no overdrive. So if that's the case with your transmission, then I would suspect that the TV valve is sticking, or at least I would look there first. A lot of times you can get the TV valve free by simply just romping on the gas and flooring it a few times, and that'll free it up. But if it doesn't come, free after that, and you still have the symptoms, then the valve body will have to be taken out, and it might be a good idea to install this shift kit so that you can correct that issue. Anyway, so I have all of our lineups, and where applicable, I have Transgo components or parts to the right of the factory parts. So we have our main TV valve train, including the plunger, the sleeve, the plunger spring, and then that's the factory spring, and this is the Transgo spring, and it has a little spacer that goes inside the spring, and then of course you just saw the valve. And then here we have our 3/4 relay and 4/3 sequence valve train. The 3/4 relay has to be installed with the big lands facing inward. If you don't, then what'll happen is you'll have no upshift to 4th gear. So no matter what you do, no matter how much you fiddle with the cable or try to romp on it, it just simply won't upshift. Okay, you have your TV limit valve train here, and then you have your 1-2 accumulator. We're going to install the black spring out of the Transgo kit, and then you have your line bias valve, and here we have the pink spring out of the kit that we'll install in lieu of the factory spring. Now, some guys will like to block this line bias valve off, and I do too in performance applications, but this is going to be a mostly, I don't want to say stock, but it's going to be a cruiser. It's not going to be used in any kind of racing or off-roading or anything real intense. All right, then we have the 3/2 control valve here. So on the other side of the valve body, we have all of our shift valving. So this is going to be the 1-2 throttle valve sleeve, spring, and 1-2 throttle valve, and then your 1-2 shift valve, and then your 2-3 throttle sleeve along with the spring, and the 2-3 throttle valve, and the 2-3 shift valve. Then we have our 3/4 throttle valve sleeve, 3/4 throttle valve spring, 3/4 throttle valve, and 3/4 shift valve. And then we have our MTV upshift valve. So we're actually going to delete this spring. We're not going to install it. And then we have our MTV downshift valve. All right, let's begin. So I like to install all the valves on this side first. So we'll start with the 1-2. I already heavily soaked these valves in WD-40, but I'm going to give them another couple spritzes. And then, yeah, there's the manual valve. Forgot to mention that. And then these two valves are for your auxiliary valve body. This is the low overrun valve, and then this is going to be the abuse valve. So when we assemble the auxiliary valve body, you'll see where they go. Okay, put the the WD and the bores. So for any valves that you install, at least steel valves anyway, aluminum valves this may not be as applicable to, you want to make sure that the valve literally drops into its final location in the valve body under its own power. So just like that. If it doesn't, you may have to polish the bore with tools called bench buddies. Bench buddies will remove a very, very tiny amount of material in the bore, including any kind of high spots or anywhere where the valve could be hanging up, and that'll allow it to move freely and seat freely so that you don't have any issues when the transmission goes back into the vehicle. So just line up your slot for your roll pin and then install the roll pin. So I'll just put a little pressure on it as I'm pushing the sleeve in, and then once it finds the groove, it'll just go right in there. Okay, same deal with the rest of the valves. So here's our 2-3. Went right in there, no issue. This is why I kind of like to install all the shift valves first, because the valve body will sit up on its own a lot easier with with that fourth clutch pressure switch not installed. So I guess I could always do that last. I don't know, it's just personal preference more than anything else. Okay, 3/4 shift valve. Okay, you really want to make sure that this one drops in nice and freely. If it doesn't, then you could potentially have issues. It may not go all the way in the first time, simply because there's a big difference between its own width and the width of the wider bore for the sleeve, the throttle valve sleeve. But when we install the sleeve, we'll make sure that the valve itself is moving freely inside the bore. If it's not, we'll take it back out and I'll polish the bore in that location so that it doesn't have any problems. So again, make sure that the valves that go into sleeves are moving freely in those sleeves. You can polish the interior of the sleeves as well if that becomes necessary. Whatever you got to do to make sure that these valves are moving without any problems. This will stick out just a little bit. That's perfectly normal. Okay, here's our 1-2, 2-3, and 3-4. So it readily returns to a closed position after I stroke it, and that's all you need to see. Okay, here's your MTV upshift. TV downshift. Now this one you are going to have to kind of seat. I mean, you'll feel it move once it's in the bore. Different punch for that. Okay, I may not be able to actually stroke the downshift valve, but when you're installing it, just use a punch and kind of, push it up and down, make sure that it's moving free and it's not binding up or whatever. All right. So what you may want to do is just put a little bit of assembly lube or petroleum jelly here for the spring to hold it in place, and then stick your other spring on the outside like so. So here's the narrow side that faces toward the valve. Okay. What you want to see is it drop right in. So what you want to do is take a punch so that you can push the valve all the way in. It looks like it wasn't actually seated all the way, but it is now, and it's moving freely. So I'll bring you back again so that you can verify that. Okay, so just push the valve all the way in as far as it'll go with the punch, and then seat your roll pin. Just want to make sure that the roll pin itself is at or below flush of the surface. If you want, you can push it a little bit further with another punch. All right, now we're going to install our spring with the little spacer. Now this little washer here, that's for diesel applications. So if you have a diesel, then you would also install that in this location here in front of the plunger. So just line up your roll pin groove. And you may have to persuade this in just a little bit. Okay, be ready with the roll pin. A little too quick to draw there. Okay. Gave me a little bit of grief, but it made it in there. All right, now we're going to do our 3-4 relay, 4-3 sequence. I don't like the way that went in. Okay, I'm just going to polish both of these bores, 3-4 relay and when you do your polishing, always saturate the bore afterward. It washes out any potential grit that might have accumulated during the polishing process. Okay, see if that's any better. Yep, perfect. So it dropped right in and seated right down into its location. So again, you want the big lands in. Yep, everything moves nice and free. Okay, MTV limit valve next. Look at your valve and spring. Then you want to hear it drop right to the bottom. And then your plug, and this will be under a little bit of spring tension. And if you watched the disassembly video, I completely overlooked that. And when I took the valve out, or when I took the little retainer out rather, the little plug flew across the room. Kind of funny. Important thing is I found it. Okay, 1-2 accumulator valve with the ship kit spring. And then your bore plug at the end here. Okay, you want to line up this hole here, this square cutout, with the roll pin location. Okay, line bias valves next. Okay, line bias valve you may have to persuade in there a little bit because it'll be under spring tension, although this one I'm not liking the way that one's going in, so we'll pull it out and polish this bore as well. Can't be afraid to polish the bores if you think that it needs it. Alright, let's give it another shot. Yeah, it's still not going in the way it should. Still hanging up about 3/4 of the way down. I don't see anything obvious on the valve itself. I think the bore is just slightly out of round. I think what I'm going to do is chuck the valve up into the drill. And I grabbed some 800 grit sandpaper and see if I could just smooth down the valve a little bit so it'll go in and seat like it should. And first I'll use 400 to knock it down, and then I'll polish it up with 1000. And see how this works out. Alright, and then we'll do 1000 grit. Oh. A little easier to take out, so maybe headed in the right direction. Still hanging up a little bit. As you can see, it's not coming right out against spring tension. And it's just simply easier to sand the valve down than it is to polish the bore. I mean, I'll be here forever trying to remove enough material to you know, to get the bore round enough to accept that valve again. Okay, I think that this is good. All right. Took a little bit longer than it should have, but main thing is you want to make sure that there's not going to be any issues when you go to reinstall the transmission. I mean, that's this little retainer got mangled when I was pulling this thing apart. Okay, last but not least is the 3-2 control valve, and I think I'm gonna proactively polish that bore, or preemptively I should say, to prevent any kind of potential hang-ups. Okay, it drops right in. Okay, when you're done, just give all your valves kind of a once-over. Make sure that everything's moving. If it's not, just take it out and polish the bore or the valve, whichever, or both. Okay, there's no spring in the MTV upshift. Check your throttle valve, make sure it's moving nice and free. Okay, So I'm happy with the way everything is with this valve body. It should be fine. So let's go ahead and assemble the auxiliary valve body now. So here are your two valve trains. Put them in first. This is the abuse valve, and this is going to be your coast clutch valve. Let's put that manual valve back in. Always forget the manual valve. Okay, that valve dropped right in, no issues. Just use like a punch or something to compress the spring so that you can get the roll pin back in. You may have to use a screwdriver also. Then the abuse valve. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and tap in the pin for the accumulator. Just make sure it seats all the way. And I'll just use WD-40. So we got some crud in here. Get that out. Just make sure your piston is nice and saturated. You can use assembly lube also. And then just press it in. So I wait till I have this bolted to the case, and then I'll torque these bolts to something like 70 inch-pounds. I don't know offhand what the book calls for, I'll annotate it, but 70 is typically what I'll do, and that's, you know, worked out fine. All right, so we got valve body done, auxiliary valve body done, shift kit installed, and I'm going to leave the fourth clutch pressure switch off for now. I'm going to be installing an internal external lockup kit, and I'm not sure if that kit has its own pressure switch that I'll need to use. So when we get around to that point, we'll see. Okay, so this was somewhat frustrating install, but at the same time, I think it's a somewhat realistic depiction as far as like the problems you might encounter when trying to put one of these things back together. And this is not unique to the 700R4. I mean, most any of these valve bodies from older transmissions, TH400s, 350s, C6s, 727s, you name it. There's going to be some little issues that you're going to encounter along the way. And this was a good example of how to respond to those issues so that you don't have to end up searching for another valve body or resorting to more desperate measures. So anyway, thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them below, and I will respond as soon as I can. Otherwise, we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks again.